What's the most out-of-pocket thing you've heard a person say? Why don't you live on disability? As a response to disabled people complaining about local government cutting back programs designed for making gainful employment accessible. I don't know why you would go to a community college when you can go to a university, sit by a high school guidance counselor giving a lecture on college admissions essays and applications in my senior app English class, after I asked naively if there's anything I had to do for community college. Turns out I had other classmates in the same boat who wanted to know too, but felt too embarrassed to ask. Anyways, I went to community college to get my prerequisites out of the way and got my associate's degree, then transferred into university for a competitive nursing program. I saved money from those first 2 years in community college. Didn't get a loan until I got into uni. Screw that guidance counselor. The company owes you nothing. You owe the company everything, my boss. After I worked for 4 years in the company, I used to work for a guy who owned a temporary employment agency. I once watched him berate his two $7 an hour receptionists because his monthly income from the business had dropped from $40,000 to $25,000, and they had nothing whatsoever to do with how much money the business made. They were receptionists. I was telling my boss how proud I was my husband got a new job. He's legally blind, and she proceeds to tell me that she wishes she had a disability so she could just get handed a job. Had to walk away from that one. I was working at a school for the kids of the 1% and we were discussing what a millionaire was. One example I gave was owning property or assets worth $1 million or over, and the kid replied, "Oh, so everyone is a millionaire then?" There's some privilege showing there, but people do have misconception about millionaires being the ultra wealthy elites, when in today's market, if you own a pretty decent house, a couple of vehicles, and have a retirement savings, you're probably a millionaire. My dad just died about a month ago. My company gave me 4 days unpaid off. I was really close to my father, so this was hard for me to deal with. My paycheck was enough to pay bills, but I had to buy my groceries on credit card to get by. My boss's brother-in-law died the following week. All he talks about is how hard this is on his wife. Between the stress of her brother dying and the reno on their $1 million cabin, he's taking his whole family to Hawaii for 10 days this month to try to deal with their grief. Meanwhile, I'm pricing urns out on Amazon to try to save money, trying to sell my dad's tools to help my mom, working full time, and taking care of a toddler. Had a friend in dental school who grew up in the rich suburbs north of Detroit. We were talking about traveling. She was going to Thailand for spring break, and she said I'd be surprised if most people hadn't traveled to at least 20 countries. I told her I'd be surprised if most people had ever left the US at all, and for all those wondering, she is from Bloomfield Hills. Had a millionaire tell me it was so great that, even though we could all be making much more than we were at a non-profit, we stayed for the kids, because who needs money when your job is rewarding? Plot twist, he was a board member who controlled our salaries. I was barely making enough to scrape by, and I know there is a lot of hate for non-profits here, but I do want to clarify that for the most part one truly loved the people and kids I worked with, and the organization itself was a community staple that did a lot of good with the minimal funds we had, and we did have some awesome board members, but others were a bit out of touch, this being the worst example. Sort of tangential. Back in college, the entire class had a 10-minute argument with one student who didn't understand that not every country has citizenship by birth laws like the US does. The professor held off jumping in for about 5 minutes to watch us explain it to her, but couldn't take it anymore and figured the student would finally believe it when she said it. Nope. She started arguing with the professor too. The total out of touch part came when she finally conceded with, "Well, that's stupid. They should just do things the way we do them here." I grew up super poor, like going days without eating kinda poor, all because my mom legit thought welfare was only for unwed black mothers. She never called anybody to confirm that, never asked around. She wouldn't apply for reduced school lunches either, because that was ghetto. Imagine being so racist and buying into the welfare queen lie so hard that you let your own children starve. My mom once told me in the 60s race didn't exist yet. Haven't really begun to unpack that one. Oh, I've definitely heard things like that. I'm an old white guy, which means I was raised by much older white guys. My dad's form of racism was segregation. He didn't think he was wishing harm on anyone. He was just raised to believe that different cultures should remain apart. He kept that to himself mostly, thinking that his silence made him better than the people who vocally hated. And maybe it did, but not by much. Later in his life, when he realized that I had black friends, Hispanic friends, gay friends, and more, he told me how proud he was that I'd escaped the example of racism and bigotry he'd set. I like to think that he'd have changed his ways if he'd lived much longer, but he passed when I was only 19. But many other relatives and friends of my dad would frequently espouse beliefs like everything was better when certain people knew their place. They legitimately believed that all of those brown-skinned people were happier and better off when they remained with their own people instead of trying to force themselves into a white society. Meanwhile, they were waging economic warfare on people of color by trying to force them into circumstances with insufficient jobs, resources, and infrastructure to support them. But they couldn't see how that was their fault. If you are depressed, just go to Tillam and take a break. Vibe high, like, bro. That is not how depression works, and yeah, I will just leave all my responsibilities just for randomly deciding going to vacations. When I told her that's not the way how depression works, she said you are just too pessimistic. Every time I feel depressed I do this. I asked how she knew she was depressed, and she answered, well, the last time I had depression was because I cried because my dad didn't want to take me to Paris for a year. I wanted to die in that moment. I used to work for a minor aristocrat. Some advice he gave out, in absolute sincerity, over the years: don't take out a mortgage. Whatever you do, terrible things, you'll end up paying a lot more for your house. You know, the thing about a Bentley is that you have to have a crap car too. I mean, there are times when a Bentley just isn't appropriate and what you need is a crap car. Crap car later turned out to be an expensive Alfa Romeo and a Bentley to be several Bentleys, recommending the Ritz in London as a place for regular after work drinks. I don't know how anyone survives on their company salary alone. His salary was more than £300k, USD 500k a year. When a guy on 8 was upset his wife was making him babysit their infant too much, so he and his mom told her there'd be no more going out. He said him going out all the time was different than her going out, and when asked for clarification he said, because she's better at changing diapers and getting the baby to sleep. It truly blows my mind that there are morons out there who think taking care of their own children is babysitting. Why don't you just buy a house? What an absolutely terrific idea. Can't believe I didn't think of that. Let's see. The cheapest house in my neighborhood is currently $335,000 and has plumbing and wiring left over from the 1970s. No central heating, mold, foundation problems, a roof that needs replacing, the oldest water heater I've ever seen in my life, a gopher issue, bad windows, a terrible location with a driveway that opens up right onto one of the busiest streets in town, and the smallest backyard ever. The bank won't approve us for a loan on the mortgage because they think we can't pay it, even though we pay $200 more than it a month in rent even after the fees. That's that idea in the garbage. What other brilliant fixes do you have for my life? My boss told me that the leasing of our company car is ending and I could buy it for really cheap if I want it. Really cheap meant 20 euros for him. He pays me 750 euros a month. I'm still in training, that's why it's so little, and I live on my own and have a car. So basically I'd have to work about 2 years for this really cheap car without spending a cent on anything. I've met many people that thought the US government paid immigrants a boatload of money when they first moved to the US, and that's how they could afford to own convenience stores and stuff. It's literally the exact opposite. People spend an insane amount of money to get here. More often than not it's almost everything they have. 4 of my millennials friends and I rented a house from a boomer some years ago. After signing the lease, boomer turns to us and asks why we aren't buying homes and flipping them like he does. This was before the mega boom in housing prices, and we explained that we wouldn't be renting if we had buying house money. I attended a typical rich kid's high school as one of the non-rich kids, at least to the standards of the environment I was in. My family was solidly middle class. The amount of asinine Delusional stuff I heard on the daily made my skin crawl sometimes. When my ex-friend turned 16, her parents gave her one of their Beamers. The thing was maybe 5 years old. She non-stop complained at the fact her parents had the audacity to give her a used car instead of buying her the new Audi she wanted. One day, she was on another diatribe about how much her parents sucked for giving her a hand-me-down car, and I snapped and told her that she should be grateful her parents had the means to give her her own car in the first place, let alone a luxury vehicle. Her response: "Well, it isn't my problem your parents don't work hard enough. I was a peasant who shared one of my parents' cars or took the bus." Sarcasm. We are human beings and the sun is the sun. How can it be bad for you? I don't think anything that's natural can be bad for you. Gwyneth Paltrow, 2013. Let's say I get bitten by a rattlesnake. I shouldn't be worried. The venom's natural, isn't it? Just a note, she was saying this because she thought that the sun couldn't possibly be bad for you. 15 minutes of sun a day should be healthy for anyone. Pure, radioactive sunlight. No SPF. What? People still use libraries. Lady who said it never worked a day in her life has a master's in something and lives in a 5-bedroom house and used to have a working kiln in the basement and a 3-car garage with gas guzzling ovens, and she owns like the most expensive kitchen appliances. I'm sure that a catering team could work out of her kitchen. I was rendered speechless. A male friend and I were walking around his city when I noticed this guy watching me intensely and following us. We are about to get into this elevator and the guy quickly jumps in before us and make prolonged eye contact with me. So I hold us back from getting in the elevator and the guy gets off and walks away. Tell my friend about it and he tells me how hurt he felt that I robbed him of his ability as a man to protect me. The fact that he thought I should ignore my own sense of self-preservation just to soothe his own ego was one of the most out of touch things I heard in a while. Former employee when I confronted him on how has been treating coworkers. I've worked with those types of people before. What types of people? You know, women. I was 16 when I lost my dad. Our family is very, very close and I wasn't expecting. So I was hit pretty hard. A month after his death, I was picking up a book at a friend's house, but my friend wasn't home. So her mother was the one to give me the book. She asked how was my family, and I said we were trying to get back on our feet. Her exact words were, "Oh, don't worry honey, give it a year or two, and you even forget your father ever existed." I was so shocked. She continued saying that first we forget their voices, and then their faces. I left her house feeling numb, sad and scared that I would forget my father. When COVID first became a pandemic and grocery stores in the US were out of stock of everything because people were panic buying, I was telling a person I was living with that they should leave food so other families could eat, and they said I don't care about other families. For reference, they bought 4 gallons of milk in one shopping trip for a small family, and other extreme quantities like that. This is the same person who, when my pop-up died while they were on a vacation, was also out of touch. "Well, I guess it's good you didn't go with us after all," was the first thing they said when they saw me. A few months ago there was this thing on the news where they tried to break down the average American spending with a pie chart. They had some of the most ridiculous things I have ever seen listed on that chart. For example, they seem to believe that the average lower middle class American donates between $300 and $600 a month to charity. Yeah, point okay. Tell that wasn't pieced together by a bunch of rich people who are completely out of touch with what it's like to be middle class or lower middle class. I work at a grocery store in an area that is mostly students, but adjacent to a couple super affluent neighborhoods. We get a lot of students using it/food stamps, but also a lot of wealthy middle-aged people. One time I scanned and bagged a girl's groceries, but when she swiped her ad she was about $5 short. I turned the transaction screen around, and we chose a few items to void so that she could pay and also have a little left on her card. Then I remove the items from her bags. She pays, gets her receipt, etc. By this time the man behind her has been waiting for about 4 or 5 minutes. I ring him up for his cart, which includes a $50 bottle of scotch, BTW, and he starts saying how rude it was that the girl didn't just pay with her other card. Normally I would just change the subject, but he kept talking about it. As he's doing this, I ask if he knows how many smoked salmons are in his cart, so I can enter a quantity instead of scanning each one. And he says, "Oh, I'm not sure, a bunch. Not that this matters, but smoked salmon is super pricey and it just added to the whole thing." Finally I finish bagging his groceries, and he hands me one of those ostentatious metal / heavy / thick / whatever credit cards and goes, "This one won't decline," and winks at me. I guess it wasn't one thing he said, but it was just such an uncomfortable interaction, and he was genuinely annoyed at and confused by the girl not just using her other card. I honestly don't even know if he understood how debit cards worked, let alone net cards. I'm so glad she left by then and didn't have to listen to him. Also, who the hell needs what ended up being 7 smoked salmons?